Now it's time for 3x3 Experiment by JCD, comparing stories from ABC, CBS, and NBC. The never-ending 3x3.
Thank you for joining us. President Biden is ramping up the pressure on Vladimir Putin, warning the Russian president of, quote, enormous consequences if he invades Ukraine, and taking the rhetoric a step further, issuing a personal threat to Putin. Ukrainian leaders are trying to calm citizens, saying there is no sign that a Russian invasion is imminent, but the war games on the country's border are telling a different story. Thousands of Russian troops conducted military drills using warplanes, naval ships, and ballistic missiles.
And this evening, President Biden saying those 8,500 U.S. troops already put on heightened alert to be sent to the region to support NATO allies. They may be moving in the nearer term, were his words today.
Words, the United States and NATO allies are sending Russia a powerful new message tonight to stay out of Ukraine. President Biden warning of enormous consequences if Russia invades. Richard Engel is in Ukraine tonight.
With diplomacy failing, NATO and Russia are both mobilizing for a potential war.
Tonight, American anti-tank and bunker-busting missiles arriving in Kiev as the Biden administration steps up military support for Ukraine in its standoff with Russia.
This is the latest delivery of US-supplied weapons and ammunition to the Ukrainian government. It's meant to send a signal of support to the people of Ukraine, but also a message of deterrence to the Kremlin.
8,500 US troops are on high alert, standing by to deploy to Europe in case this crisis escalates further. And tonight, President Biden saying they could be on the move sooner rather than later.
Well, it depends. What would lead to that is what's going to happen, what Putin does or doesn't do. And I may be moving some of those troops in the nearer term just because it takes time.
Well, now to Ukraine, where the crisis deepens as the latest round of military equipment arrived today in support of Kyiv's defense capabilities. And CBS's Holly Williams was there.
NATO allies, big and small, are also moving east. Spain deploying fighter jets to Bulgaria and warships to the Black Sea. Denmark sending jets to Lithuania. And France vowing to defend Romania.
In Ukraine tonight, a delivery of nearly 300 Javelin anti-tank missiles and other munitions.
This is just the latest shipment in $200 million worth of emergency military assistance from the US.
We saw these anti-tank weapons being used in training by the Ukrainian military last month. The Kremlin says this is American and NATO interference on its doorstep. The Ukrainian government's been playing down the sense of crisis here. But speaking exclusively to ABC News, the acting American ambassador in Ukraine, Christina Kavin, warning Russia could do anything at any moment.
It's like a gun to the head of Ukraine, and we don't think that Ukraine should have to live with a loaded gun to its head.
Russia still denies it has plans to invade, despite the roughly 100,000 troops it's massed on Ukraine's border. But the US has warned Russia may use unconventional tactics.
Paramilitary tactics, so-called gray zone attacks, and actions by Russian soldiers not wearing Russian uniforms.
Ukraine's even suggested Russia could stage an accident in a chemical factory as a pretext for moving in. Today, Ukraine arrested what it called a gang planning attacks on infrastructure and claims they were coordinated by Russia. In eastern Ukraine in 2014, we witnessed Russian-backed fighters take control of towns and cities. That conflict's now killed more than 14,000. The US says Russia controls the armed rebels.
Biden now saying he'd even sanction Putin if he attacks.
If he were to move in with all those forces, it would be the largest invasion since World War II. It would change the world.
Can you tell me, are you Ukrainian or are you Russian?
I'm just a person.
You're just a person?
Yes.
You won't tell me?
No.
So basically...
And suspected Russian hackers have succeeded in crashing the power grid here. When this power station came under attack in 2015, nearly 250,000 people lost electricity.
There are still hopes for a diplomatic solution. Tomorrow, Ukrainian and Russian officials will meet in Paris, along with their French and German counterparts. Nora.
Holly Williams in Ukraine for us. Thank you.
A new shipment of American anti-tank missiles arriving in Ukraine. The Russians releasing new video tonight of their troops in training exercises.
Maybe moving some of those troops in the nearer term, just because it takes time. And again, it's not provocative.
More than 100,000 Russian troops are now gathered on Ukraine's borders, with trainloads of troops and equipment moving into Belarus on the northern frontier.
All of Eastern Europe is a potential front, while Russia denies it will invade with new military drills today. It keeps the world guessing.
But America's taking no chances. Today's 79-ton military shipment includes more than 270 Javelin anti-tank missiles and over 800 shoulder-fired bunker-busting rockets. The Kremlin's consistently denied it plans to invade, accusing the U.S. of hysteria.
And Ian Panel back with us from Ukraine's capital again tonight. Just incredible reporting from you and the team. And Ian, I know you said today that President Biden is now indicating that he would consider personal sanctions on Vladimir Putin if Russia invades.
Yeah, that's right, David. If Putin invaded Ukraine, President Biden says, quote, there'd be enormous consequences, including possible sanctions against Putin himself. Worth remembering, though, that when U.S. senators proposed the very same idea last week, the Kremlin said it would be a great mistake that would potentially cut off all relations between America and Russia.
Tonight, more American weapons, part of a $200 million, 90-ton package, arrived in Ukraine to help defend against a possible Russian invasion.
And while U.S. troops wait on heightened alert here, about 300 anti-tank missiles and other American-made weapons like bunker busters arrived in Kyiv today. We were there to see it.
President Biden saying he's close to deciding whether to mobilize additional U.S. troops already on high alert to Eastern Europe, although not inside Ukraine.
Well, what would lead to that is what's going to happen, what Putin does or doesn't do. And I may be moving some of those troops in the nearer term, just because it takes time.
Ukraine's president, and saying he might sanction President Putin himself if he invades.
If he were to move in with all those forces, it would be the largest invasion since World War II. It would change the world.
Several thousand U.S. troops already in Europe also could be repositioned, but the growing Allied response force is still no match for Putin's roughly 100,000 troops on the ground. At this point, almost completely encircling Ukraine. The White House says an invasion is imminent, and Mr. Biden summoned his top national security advisors for a meeting on the crisis, saying he would specifically target Putin with economic sanctions if the Russian leader invades. The Russians reiterated today they have no plans to attack. Russia could invade Ukraine at any time, and today went further than ever before to make clear Vladimir Putin will face personal economic sanctions if he invades, and U.S. troops could be headed to the region sooner rather than later. But the administration, fearing Putin could cut off fuel shipments to run through Ukraine in the coming weeks, is now working with oil and gas suppliers around the globe to ensure there is adequate supply. Some Republicans say they fear Mr. Biden is still moving too slowly against Putin.
Even when they're taking the right steps now, those right steps tend to be half measures, and they're certainly much too late.
But Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, a frequent critic of the president, has a different view.
It appears to me the administration is moving in the right direction.
Ed joins us now from the White House. So what are you hearing about U.S. troop deployments?
Well, CBS News has learned tonight the Pentagon is preparing to announce that elements of the Army's 82nd Airborne Division out of Fort Bragg, North Carolina, could be among the elements deployed to the region. Nora?
Ed at the White House, thank you.
This needs to be made illegal.